about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. Hold on one second, please. Would you make the camera zoom in a little bit, please? We have a little camera problem here. We're getting it fixed, ladies and gentlemen. Just hold on. On top, there's a little thing you squirt back and forth. That's it. There you go. Bring me in closer. That's it. Fine. Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. We had a camera problem here. Folks, today I'd like to talk about borders. I think this is one of the most misunderstood concepts and the most misunderstood political hot dogs that we have out there today. The problem is that all we hear on television and all we hear is from our political leaders is that we need to secure our borders. I mean, we're not safe unless we secure our borders. You know, quite frankly, I don't even understand the gist of borders. I don't understand the concept of borders. You know, if we're so concerned about borders and how important borders are, when we came here, let's go back in history. We came here from beyond the Atlantic, and other people came here even before, probably 100 years before, hundreds of years before us, and landed here in what we now call the United States, you know, the New World, all right? There were no borders. We just stopped our ships, got in the rowboats, and went on land and settled the place. There was no borders. No one was securing borders. All right. Now, was that bad for the New World? Well, for some people, it was very bad. Obviously, we came here and we killed a lot of people unnecessarily, inhumanely, because we're very religious people. You know, we're very God-driven people. You know, but we did do a lot of harm. But we came here. The Indians, the natives, I should say, who lived here, didn't say, "May I see your papers?" No, we just came here and took the place over. And then we treated the residents, the original residents of this country, the people who were settled here before we were here, we treated them very poorly. We lied, cheated, and stole their land, you know. Now this is, our ancestors did this, right? Now, not my direct ancestors, but people from Europe did that. And they did that not only in North America, they did it in South America, they did it in Central America, all right? So we came here, we just took the land, all right, and settled here, all right? And now we talk about how important borders are. Well, if borders were so important, why didn't we respect the borders when we came here in the first place? You know, you have to be honest with yourself. You just can't say, well, you know, borders are important now because we're here, but they weren't important when we weren't here. I mean, either borders are a valid concept or an invalid concept. Now, if they were borders and for some reason we couldn't get in because they were Indian fighters or native fighters, the natives of the area were there, and they were technologically more advanced than we were and blew the ships out of the water, we wouldn't be here, right? But no, that didn't happen. We came here, we settled, and in some cases, we bought land from them, we traded with them. In some cases, we just came here and most times just settled in and then sat down. So why does the principle change from the way it was hundreds of years ago to today? I don't understand the concept of borders. I just don't understand it. It's okay for us to come here and take land from the natives who settled this land for hundreds and who knows how many hundreds of years. But now that we're here, wait, we need walls. Do you see something very disingenuous in that? You know, it was interesting. back in the this is going back a few years. I was in Europe, and I remember walking down a street, and it was a residential area. You know, the typical, what do you see, typical 3-story houses in Europe, and you know, they're just all the same. They just row after row of houses, and don't recall why I was on that street at that time, but I noticed on a street corner there was a concrete abutment, a little concrete pillar actually, and there was a S on it, you know, and I'm looking at it and I was trying to figure out what the S stood for. I don't know if it meant stop, you know, I didn't know. You know, I didn't know if it was a traffic sign or what. And so I looked around it, and on the other side there was the letter F. And I looked at it and I couldn't make head or tails of things. And it really bugged me that I had no idea what this pillar was. It was only about 4 feet tall. And so a gentleman was walking by. I said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" He said, "Yes, I speak English better than you do." He did. He spoke English perfectly well. And I said, "I have a question." I said, "What does this mean, S and F on the other side of this concrete pillar?" He said, he said, "When you're standing on this side of the pillar, you're in Switzerland. When you're standing on that side, you're in France." I said, "That's interesting." And he went by. And I thought to myself, there were no troops, no tanks, no guards, no gates, no nothing. Now, it was a residential area, and it was, people were just, very few people walking by, remember. It was very sparsely populated where I was. And people were just walking back and forth. And I started thinking, I said, wait, this is a border, and there's no border. And didn't seem to bother anyone. Well, the fact is that if you're on this side, you're in a country that has certain rules and regulations, and you abide by those rules and regulations. And you're on the other side, the rules may be very different, and you abide by those rules and regulations. Very simple, right? I mean, a country can say, well, we stop here, and another country starts there. I guess that's fine. I'm not really even sure if that's fine. But let's, for the sake of argument, let's just say it's okay. Well, if that's okay, why are we building a wall? I don't understand it. Let's take an example. Let's assume for a second. I know I'm just going off the deep end a little bit because this drives me absolutely nuts, you know. But let's assume for a second that a woman was pregnant. She's in her last trimester. What do they call it? You know, she's 9 months pregnant. She's gonna have a baby any minute, okay? And she is walking right along the U.S. border. I mean, just a foot from the U.S.-Mexican border. And she has a baby. But when she has the baby, she walks 1 foot over and she has the baby in the United States. Well, now that baby is a U.S. citizen, just by virtue of walking that 1 foot. Now, does that make any sense to you? I mean, she lives in Mexico. She doesn't speak English. She's Mexican, basically. And, and she just sort of wandered off a little bit more. She went a foot over, and now the child is really a U.S. citizen. Well, if she didn't want to have the child to be a U.S. citizen, she would walk over to the Mexican side and say, boy, now he's a Mexican citizen. If you see, my point is that border served no purpose whatsoever, other than you have to abide by the laws and regulations of that country. What difference does it make where a person is born? If a person is in Mexico and they come to the United States, as they did back in the 30s and prior to 1940s or 50s, there was an open border. Mexicans would come in, and they would do most of the farm work. They're very hardworking, honest, hardworking people, right? And they came in, they did their work, and at the end of the day or the week, usually the week, they went back home again. Yes, they got paid in American dollars. They brought it home, right? But that enriched that country. But by enriching a country, you also precipitate trade, because the richer the people are there, the more money they spend, the more goods we can sell to Mexico. Open borders are a win for absolutely everyone. There are no losers in open borders at all. And of course, we hear the thing, oh, but what about the war on drugs? What about drugs? All the drugs are coming up from Central America, from Mexico into the United States. Well, that's not a border problem. That's a drug problem. But who created the drug problem? Our government. The more restrictions they put on drugs, the more expensive drugs become. The more expensive drugs become, the more criminals get involved in it, because there's money to be made by it. Let's take that situation just in and of itself. Let's assume the United States says all drugs are legal, everything, and which I believe in. If you want to take cocaine, crack, whatever you want, that's your business. It's not my business. You can do whatever you want. Now, if you use that to harm somebody else, then you go to jail. Right? But what happens when you make drugs legal? And everyone can make drugs. We can have, poppy seeds in the backyard. We can be growing everything. Our kitchens could be methamphetamine labs. Everything. What happens to the price? The price goes down to zero, because everyone can make it. Anyone can make it with just regular household utensils and supplies, stuff that you can probably get at Walmart, and they can make their own. They can make their own. Why would they go out and spend $50 for a small package? Well, what you do is you put the cartels out of business when you end the war on drugs. Well, if you end, my point being is, if you end the war on drugs, right, and you put the cartels out of business, the people who are coming from Mexico to the United States, for example, are what? They're coming here to work. They're not here to sell drugs. There's no money in it. Why risk your life? And when you can think about it, these people travel, some of them from Central America through Mexico, just to come to the United States. And you think they made that sacrifice, and many died doing it. Make that sacrifice to come here to hurt people? No, they come here to work. And I don't understand. The higher the wall, the worse it gets. Take down the wall, President Trump. Take down the wall. Open the borders. Back during the Depression, all of the migration from Mexico to the United States for people to work actually ceased. There was very few people coming here to work, because there was no work to give out. So actually people stopped coming over. There was no one crossing the border from Mexico to the United States, because there were no jobs. And during good times, when there were jobs, at the end of the week, people went home to their families. Now, they went home with a lot more money than they would have made in Mexico. But still, they were doing labor that Americans just would not do. And quite frankly, in many cases, were incapable of doing. So by building a wall, it's sort of like making, drugs illegal, right? You make everything more expensive. You create more criminals for people who don't want to be criminals but want to work. There is absolutely no reason for a wall whatsoever. Now, here's the sorrowful part. They say, oh, but we're not going to get rid of the war on drugs. That's why we need the wall. Let's stay on that concept at all. Let's just stay on that one just for a second, all right? Not over 90% of the drugs don't come over the wall, don't come over the Mexican border. They come by boat, because it's too dangerous, and the quantities that you can transport overland are very small. But you can have a boat filled with drugs. You can go to any port. There's no guards there. Unload it, and man, you make a fortune. And, some of the richest men in the world are people who are dealing in drugs, illegal drugs, because America has made them illegal. Now, I know the argument, if you make them legal, everybody will be on drugs. That's not true. I mean, I have money. I mean, if I wanted to, I can find somebody who has any drug, here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I mean, this is actually Tulsa, Oklahoma, believe it or not, is one of the crime capitals of the United States. That's why you see it on TV all the time on live PD. They have Tulsa all the time, And I can get drugs. I'm sure if I asked around, they say, "Oh yeah, I know somebody. Go see Bob over there at the lounge, and he'll set you up." I'm sure in 5 minutes I can have any drug I want, right? And I can afford to pay for it. But I don't do it. Why? Because it's not good for me. I don't want to die young. I'm still young. I'm 75. I'm young. I intend to live another 75 years. I don't want to take drugs, right? And that's the way people think. Now, Portugal did something smart. They did exactly what I'm espousing. They ended their entire war on drugs. Everything is legal. And what happened? Drug usage went down. Well, there was no money in it. There was no reason. I mean, if you had a product and if you sold the product, you would lose money, would you promote it? No, you wouldn't, right? So there's less promotion of the product. Fewer people were on drugs. More people went to rehabilitation. And now their drug problem is phasing out. I mean, why don't people in the United States look at the successes of other countries, even a small backwards country, as Portugal, as we consider, but that's our mentality, But no, they're way ahead of us in so many ways. Why don't we take that? Well, I truly don't know the answer to that, but I'm almost convinced of this one thing, is that larger government means more money to the bureaucrats in Washington. If you have a drug czar, you got to pay him. And a drug czar doesn't make $25,000 or $45,000 a year. They make $500,000 a year. Then they need a whole department. Then they need funding by the government. And there's money going back and forth, back and forth. And the larger they get, the more corrupt they get. And I'm not saying that little Sally, who's doing the work on as a clerk, working for the government, is corrupt. I'm talking about the big people, the big boys. No, they are corrupt. They're terrible, right? The whole system is corrupt. So we have drugs, which we shouldn't have, being administered by a corrupt administration. Do you see a problem with that? I see a heck of a problem with that. It's like having the inmates running the prison. Ain't going to work very well. At least not for the guards or not for the people, who they're trying to that the prison is supposed to be protecting. So we have this problem, but it's our mentality. We have no. Look, have you seen the wall that we already have? I mean, they're climbing over the walls. They're and what they do, there are places where there's water, where the Gulf of Mexico, where what they do is they go out in the water, swim around, come around, and go on the beach on the Americans, and get off and go on the beach and go. I mean, there's no one stopping them, Aside from all of that, I mean, I think it's immoral, it's unethical for us to have a war on drugs, but we can't even afford it. I mean, if you look at the government figures, and these are the conservative figures that don't include all the other little things that they forget to put in, our debt right now is approaching like $125 trillion. That includes Medicare and Medicaid. Our current portion of the debt is approaching $22 trillion. That's the current portion that we can't pay. The current portion that we cannot pay is $22 trillion. And we're building a wall? How insane could you be? I mean, where the heck is this guy? The only thing I can think of is that there must be people making big money on the war on drugs in the United States, I mean in Washington, by perpetuating the war on drugs, these people make money. And what they do with that money is they promote how poor, how dangerous drugs are, and how we need to even allocate even more money so they can make more money. And where does this money come from? It comes from us. We're a bankrupt nation. Right now, we are absolutely bankrupt. If you look at any economist would tell you that, right? And so, what do we have now? We have a bankrupt nation accelerating a war on drugs that we cannot win. They say, well, we're going to have this wall where you can't climb over them. The war on drugs, they make hundreds of billions of dollars from the war on drugs. They can build a Hilton hotel underneath the wall, and we wouldn't know it. And they may make money on that. They can build, they can burrow, they can tunnels. I mean, but most of our drugs don't come via land. Over 90% come via sea. So now what do? We build a wall, drug situation stays the same. Then we panic, and then we say, oh, now we have to do something more. We have to now we're going to have gates on our beaches. I mean, it's never going to stop. And they won't stop because the people in Washington are making money on the war on drugs. The American citizen is the only one not doing so. But let's get back to the Constitution. Where's in the Constitution that says that the government can restrict its citizens from taking substances which the government feels are not to their best interest? Nowhere. There's nothing like that. You want to take drugs? Hey, take liquor, right? I mean, you can drink all the liquor you want. You can die of overdose of liquor, but yet we sell liquor. Look what happened during the Prohibition. The cost of liquor went up to the moon, right? And who made the money? Well, the gangs, the people who were peddling liquor. They got filthy rich. They went on the underground. There were restaurants. There were still restaurants serving liquor, but they weren't on the main street. They were down in basements. They were in the back rooms and stuff like that. It didn't stop people from drinking. So here we are as a nation, knowing what the results would be from our actions. And yet, what do? We do the same thing. They say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. We're insane. We know what the results will be, but we keep on throwing more money at it. And this goes back to, this branches another subject of our school system. You think of our school system, which is another government boondoggle, which I think we should get rid of 100%. There should be no Department of Education whatsoever. Government should not be involved in our education of children. Should be the parents' responsibility. And how they do it is of no concern of mine. It's their concern. It's not the government's concern, because the government has already proved it's absolutely failed in that